Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I got an audio introduction to come. I'm going to start with this, though. I have 3 clips I copied off of the news this weekend, and they are humdingers. I don't think I've used the word humdinger before on the term, I guess. But let's start here with Howard Dean. This is like stunning.
And the media thinks they're a third player in this, and they are a third player, but none of them are running for president. And I think Kamala's got to do what she thinks is right, and I support it.
But don't you think it's key to a healthy democracy that candidates running for the highest office in the land answer some questions so that voters are more informed in their choice?
She's answered plenty of questions. The argument here is not whether she should answer the questions; it's who gets to ask the questions. And the media has always been the self-appointed referees. I find that to be fairly unhealthy. She'll get to all her audience by using all the kinds of ways there are to reach out. So I understand the insult that the reporters and the media feel, but they're just another player who wants to get down on the act. And I think Kamala ought to follow her own instincts, and people will know her views without her sitting down for editorial board meeting with mostly old white guys who decide whether they want to endorse her or not.
I want to remind you, though, that journalists, it is their job to ask questions, and answering questions for the administration and for the president. That is part of the job. That's why there's the briefing room inside the White House. And I will also say that the White House press corps is a little more diverse than what you just described. But let's move on.
So I just caught the tail end of this, right? And so the CNN reporter finally acknowledges that Kamala hasn't done one interview, right? One interview. And he says that the media thinks they're the self-appointed referees, and she doesn't need to answer their questions because she's answered plenty of questions. She's answered questions. She's a question answerer. Can you believe what this MNFer just said? I don't get shocked or stunned by things very much because, it's the apocalypse. And stuff that we've seen from the political process, Trump and his ridiculous, ketchup gate and these things. Stuff with Trump is always, Trump just doesn't play by the rules. And now the Democrats have realized they don't have to play either, which I have a long narrative audio to get to after I show you all these clips. But, she isn't doing interviews. And there's no excuse because she's not senile. Like, she doesn't have dementia. We know why they hid Joe Biden away. And she doesn't have dementia. But for him to say that the media thinks they're the self-appointed referees, that's the job of the media to do interviews. And she has to do them, or she doesn't. Like, she could win the election without doing any interviews. And we know that the media is not that important because only old people watch it, like CNN and MSNBC. But the clips that are, the clips of her interview, which any kind of gaffe she has, any kind of, bad answer, any kind of tough question she can't field, will be shown on the internet over and over again. And so that's what they don't want. They want everything to be completely controlled. And, it's stunning that they wouldn't do one interview with her. Like, she's going to have to, I guess maybe she won't have to answer questions at a press conference as president, right? And she isn't getting hurt by it, so they're like, well, let's keep on going, right? Like when Fetterman had that disastrous debate where he couldn't, like his opening statement, he said, "Good night, everybody." Like when he had that moment where his brain wasn't functioning at all, and he had, all the things that happened, and they realized he wasn't hurt by this debate performance. It was one of the worst debates ever. And so the thing with Jojo Magoo, people saw that coming with him being with dementia. They were trying to get rid of the guy, so whatever, they were, they put the guy out there so they could put in Kamala. That was obviously part of the plan. And so they realized, hey, we're not going to be hurt by this. Kamala's going after a younger voting bloc demographic. They don't need the mainstream media. They don't have to risk her saying something stupid in the interview. Trump is, Trump. He's already disliked. And so they have this plan, right? The plan of, like, nobody knows really who she is. The stuff they put out at the convention was just completely bogus and BS. And, it was her life story. She's not answering questions about, her role in the cover-up of Joe Biden's senility, the border, immigration, things like this, right? Plus, like, her answers, which they can probably figure out anyway, the RNC, but they don't know those answers. The things she's going to talk about, her talking points when she gets to the debate. So Trump is going to have to deal with some unknowns. Trump is doing interviews every day. RFK Jr. was saying he does interviews multiple times a day. Anytime somebody asks him to do an interview. In fact, he said he was blacklisted, which I'll get into, by the mainstream media. And the only news channel that was willing to interview him was Fox. And so, like they're not even acknowledging Kennedy, and she won't do an interview. And this woman just concedes this point like it's acceptable. And him saying that they're the self-appointed referees when CNN and MSNBC had been nothing but great to Kamala. They're hating on Trump all the time, which is, like the whole point of it. I mean, the media is just there to tell you how bad Trump sucks and the people who want to vote for him suck. And again, I'm not endorsing Trump because Trump sucks and Trump's a disaster. Like, I don't even know what I want to see happen here. Like, it's the only good thing is one of these two horrible people is going to be bummed out, and their horrible brain dead supporters are going to be bummed out, but that'll be good. Like, it'll be interesting to watch, but everything else, it's not, there's nothing there, right? There's no hope here. There's nothing good that's going to happen from this, right? But she's not doing interviews. And Howard Dean, again, he's not part of her campaign, but he's saying that's okay. And again, like she won't even do interviews with shills. Like CNN and MSNBC is full with shills, and she won't even do interviews with them, right? Like, she could do interviews with Jen Psaki, which we'll get into in a second, or any of these people. They're not going to ask her any real tough questions. I mean, Sarah Palin did interviews, right? Which I think I say in I did the audio already, the introduction. But it was stunning that it's like okay for her not to do interviews. And it shows you what they think they can get away with. And they are getting away with it. It's working, right? So they don't have to do interviews with Kamala. I mean, she should be doing interviews today, Monday, after the convention. And she's not. Like, she'll just go around, do her rallies, and everything she's completely handled. And for him to say she has to do what her instincts tell her, whatever he said there. She's not making this decision. Kamala isn't the one saying, I don't want to do interviews. They're telling her exactly what to do. She's completely handled on every level. They only got a couple months left. And right now she has a direct path to the White House. Like, she has all the momentum and things like this. And so they don't want to have anything that can remind people how unlikable she is. But, like, the media should be, going off on this and slamming. My God, you guys are cutting us out. Like, there's something wrong with this. And they can talk about how she got there with Willie Brown. Like, that's just not something, that's not part of her story, right? She didn't tell that part in her biography, how she got, a foot in the door by sleeping with a guy who's, 60 years old, twice her age when she was 29 for 10 years, like gave her a Mercedes and things, all this stuff that happened, right? And she's not going to talk about Joe Biden and his senility or not the economy or not the border. And they could be talking about that every day, how bad it is, right? I mean, MSNBC, CNN could just start hammering her until she give an interview. Like, they could be telling their, the people who are loyal to her and, the networks about all her negatives, and there's plenty of them, and do an interview. Like, you're not cutting us out, right? They're not going to do that. They're just going to go carry water for her and talk about how great it is, right? So that's, like, stunning. Like, she's just not doing interviews, and they're just saying, yeah, we don't have to. Even with shills. Like, they're not even willing to put her out there in front of shills. That's how bad she is. Like, they don't trust her enough to let her interview with shills. And so that's like a big moment. But then there's these other things that happen.
Harrison Walls and so many others talk about how much they love this country and thought, yeah, I love my country too. I mean, how many Americans simply saw something reflected in themselves during that convention? My guess is a whole lot. Because here's the thing, what we saw this week, that is America. It is multicultural, diverse, joyful, unique, united. And it was that majority view that was on display in Chicago. Loving America over slandering it, celebrating diversity over rejecting it, embracing our neighbors rather than talking about kicking them out of the country.
It's amazing how Jen Psaki sucks worse. Like, she's more and more stiff. Their cadence of her voice more uptight. There's no flow to the way she talks. And you think it'd be getting better, but it's getting worse. But for her to say, like, this patriotism, like the new patriotism is like, if the freak show is good, right? Like, weird is good. Like, they're talking about how weird Trump and J.D. Vance are, but then they went on a weird-a-thon with all these different people, right? You know, people who are different. It's one thing to be different, but it's another thing to be low-functioning, right? You have low-functioning people that are celebrated now. You know, people who can't hold jobs, can't, contribute to society, selfish, big ego people, mentally ill people, right? And they're celebrating all that stuff, right? They're calling it diversity, and it's clearly not. But her saying that they saw how much Kamala Harris and whatever his name is, Walsh, loved America. And they're like, hey, I see something in myself in them. Like, that's not what happened there, right? Oh, they just love America so much. Like, no, nobody thought that, right? They're trying to say it's patriotism, but it's like they're trying to steal. They don't even have their own platform. Like, their platform is, well, at least we're not Trump. But then they try to be Republicans now, right? Freedom is one of the big words, all these things like that. You know, Kamala's a protector. You know, we're the ones on security. We're the good ones. Like, they're just making up these things. And not that the Republicans are good or are honest. It's not that at all. But this is, they don't even have, they're so unoriginal. They've been stealing from the truth community forever. And what delusional person would look at that and say that there was patriotism there, right? Like, this is the new patriotism. We love our neighbors. Our neighbors are great, You not go to Walmart, you'll see it's a degradation, right? We're going to get into it, like the health epidemic that RFK Jr. has been talking about since he's, I guess he's been talking about on the campaign trail, but nobody knows because he's been relatively ignored. And then there was this one here.
Will have much impact at all, and most of the early commentary was just dead wrong. There's no reason for him to be able to transfer much to Trump. He was already down really below 5%. One network poll had it at 2% when he withdrew. And so he's out of the race, essentially. I don't think Donald Trump is going to drag him around the country to his rallies, because with RFK Jr., you never know what you're going to get. He's a lot like Trump in that sense. He'll say anything, and he'll give some kooky, should I say it, weird answers.
So RFK Jr. Withdraws his candidacy and endorses Trump, and he's now weird. Like, this is how quickly this talk, and it's like an eighth grade talking point, right? This guy works at school, works in, well, he used to be a principal and a coach. You're so weird. Oh, he's so weird. They're so weird. Like, why is this weird? It's like they're eighth grade high school kids, they're talking about, like, oh, look how weird they are. And you can't say that you love your neighbors and everyone's great and we're all inclusive, but you say these things about how weird people are, right? Like, saying someone's weird is, marginalizing them, right? When they're like so weird. Like, and I saw a lot this weekend. I mean, this girl that's interviewing, I've seen her before. I've seen her but not noticed her. But she was in these two interviews with this clown and Howard Dean, and they rolled out Wolf Blitzer for a little bit on Saturday night to talk about the Israel thing. But they were talking about the convention in ways that was, these people are being cut out because they're not being interviewed. They're not being able to interview Kamala. The media is essentially being cut out. Howard Dean saying, you guys aren't the referees. Well, then what's their job, right? I mean, they're shills for her. They're shills for her. And they won't, they're being cut out and they're still carrying the water there and just these ridiculous statements. And then, let's get into it. I have an audio here. But this reporter, I don't think she has a regular show. She was, every time I turned on the news this weekend, whatever this is, CNN or MSNBC, I think this is CNN, she was on, and it's the day after the convention. Big things have just happened, right? They had a convention. Free Zakaria wasn't even in, right? Like, some of the regular people on CNN, they had people coming in and substituting for them. And they just had this huge this convention, and RFK Jr. just announced, plus Israel just struck Hezbollah. And like I said, they brought Wolf Blitzer in to cover this breaking news, but all these other people, their normal anchors weren't even on, and this was a huge week in, presidential politics, and they got this, this girl who they're not going to show her clips from her show, right? Like I couldn't find the Howard Dean interview. The part that I showed you guys, she had already asked at least one or two questions about Kamala not doing interviews. I wanted to see the whole thing, from the beginning, but, CNN didn't put it up. So, like, this is, like I said, stunning that they're just going with this route. It's not stunning that they're doing this. It's probably most stunning that they're getting away with it, right? Like, like Kamala's not doing interviews, and they're just making up a reality that doesn't exist in a much more flagrant way than we've seen. Like the gaslighting is off the charts here. All right, let's get into my introduction audio here. Okay, before we get into the stuff here, let's do the introduction stuff, the shadow banning and what people have to do, subscribe, resubscribe, if you get unsubscribed, all that stuff. Membership program, likes probably the biggest one. Let YouTube know that you're interested in the content here so you can get notified occasionally. All the rest of it, right? Merch and all this stuff. The Democrats, the people controlling the democratic system and the electoral system in general, I mean, the controllers, they have been really incompetent over the last so many years, but they've learned, and what they've done here is a freaking masterpiece with Kamala Harris. They've taken somebody who is one of the most unlikable people in politics, right? She is at least as unlikable as Hillary Clinton. But Hillary Clinton was around for a long time, and people at least thought she was deserving, right? She paid her dues. She got married to Bill Clinton. She survived the humiliation. She stuck in there with the humiliation of the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, all the Bill Clinton cheating, all the stuff like that. She hung around him. She just was like political herpes, and she paid her dues, and she thought it was her turn, right? And Obama came in and, out of nowhere and took her turn away from her, and she still stuck around and survived all that stuff. And then she was running against Donald Trump, who was, didn't even seem like he really wanted to win in the beginning, and in the end, in the middle, he did for a little bit. But somehow she lost to him because she was so unlikable. And Kamala didn't do any of that shit, right? Kamala, I mean, just this whole idea that she, whatever grade she got, whatever level of education, whatever kind of lawyer she was, whatever she was, she would have worked her way through mediocre, she probably would have, I mean, just based on her personality and, she's ambitious, she probably would have had some level of wealth and prestige. I mean, she could have dated a guy for like a couple weeks or a year or something and got something, but she dated a guy for 10 years. A guy who was 60 years older, 5 years older than her mom, right? I'm 60, so I'm that guy's age. And, when you look at people who, I just saw a video of myself at a gathering. I was watching one of these old Sajmark videos. I just did a long voiceover about it because it's like surreal because I couldn't even recognize myself. It was a video of a spiritual gathering, and I was at the gathering. And it was some old, somebody took some video off their phone. And I was recognizing people. I'm like, oh my God, they look so young, like people I knew. This is back when Master Charge was the master of the system, all these things, right? And I saw myself, and it took me a while. I'm like, I know that person. I'm like, oh, it's me, right? And like, it wasn't me. Like, it was surreal. I just talk about this long voiceover that I'm going to put up on the my Apocalypse Now channel, and that'll be part of the Journey series. But it was a weird thing, and it's been kind of like, I don't want to say on my mind for the last couple of weeks, and I started talking about it. But I didn't like identify with myself, right? It was like I remember being there, and but it was so long ago. Like the kind of person that I am now, the person I am now, and the person that I was then are completely different, right? I think I was 31 at the time, 31 to 32, so almost 28 years ago. And there's a significant difference between someone in their 30s and someone in their 60s. I mean, a whole lifetime, right? Like at that time, I wasn't married. I'd just become a preceptor. And, I can't even describe all the different things that I've been through and, accomplishments and failures. I didn't have any kids, became a dad, got my master's degree, and then, the YouTube channel and traveling and, all these things, right? A lot of stuff has happened. But even someone 10 years younger than you, like they don't get the references, right? My wife and I grew up at the same time. We watched the same TV shows. We had, similar experience in pretty much every way. It's because we were, within a few years of each other, right? In terms of our, upbringing. We were part of the same generation. And someone 10 years ago just doesn't have those shared experiences and things like that. And it's certainly 20 years ago, but 30 years ago. Like it's, that's someone who's your kid's age, right? I was a dad by the time I was 32, 33 years old, right? And so, one of those two. And so, like, it's, that's a weird thing that happened. So Kamala Harris didn't just, like, service the guy. So Kamala knee pads Harris didn't service the guy. She dated him for 10 years. She was, 29, and she was almost 40 when they broke up, pretty much getting rid of any chance of having kids. Like, she gave not only her youth to this guy, right, to get, so she paid a price for it. Dating a really old dude, right, like a really old dude, and for 10 years where she gave him whatever she gave him, and he provided her with mentorship and jobs and connections and things like that, to where her being president is contingent on that relationship, right? Like if she didn't do that, she wouldn't be who she is. And so you could say that's paying dues, but it's not the kind of dues that most women, even feminists, are a big fan of, right? Somebody basically prostituting themselves for political and, career advancement. It's the kind of thing that, women who have paid their dues without, doing something like that are not a fan of, right? Someone like Hillary Clinton probably, ate shit for all those years. And, she had her own issues with Bill Clinton. Like he was, similar situation where he was this sort of celebrity star, the political star, whatever it was, right? But she, made some blunders. She's kind of a dope. She's kind of ditzy in some ways. So I'm talking about Kamala. And then she, was gifted this position in, as a senator. And she wasn't really very likable. And she ran for president, and she was rejected. She got less than 1% of the vote. I always talk about this, but, we all know this was the case because it is the case. So she, wasn't really, even though they liked her, the powers that be liked her, American people didn't. Democratic people didn't. Republicans certainly. But they gave her the vice presidency anyways, maybe as an insurance policy because she's so unlikable that they said, well, they're never going to kick Biden out for being too old if that's the alternative. And maybe she did the job. Maybe like her being so unlikable kept him from having, maybe they would have got rid of him after a couple of years because he was obviously had, some kind of, they say, Parkinson's is what I believe it is, right? That doctor I showed you, that video. And so maybe she kept him around. Who knows, right? But during that period of time, she was the border czar, which was a disaster. She has no real signature accomplishments. And by the end of her vice presidency, she had polled at the lowest in terms of approval rating of any vice president in history. So she was unelectable before, and now people had a negative opinion of her. Plus, she had a guy who American people had all realized was dementia, and they didn't get it overnight, and that he was a part of a administration that covered all that up for a number of years, and the American people like get rid of this guy, and they didn't. And they didn't do it fair and square where they got rid of him and had a primary. They waited till the last minute, and then they stabbed the guy in the back, and they rolled out this unlikable candidate who has no signature accomplishments. The last time she ran for something, she was a disaster, the presidency in 2020. And, she is somebody who, like, even in interviews and things, was just goofy and said weird things and, that off-putting cackle, all that stuff, right? She's got all this stuff. And somehow they made it work. They made it work with somebody. If they can make it work with her, they can pretty much get anybody elected, right? They did it with a senile guy who was obviously having dementia. Of course, they had a media that was complicit and, they were running against Trump. All you Trumpers, you got to realize that this guy is a disaster for you. Because if you run anybody else, and these people are all horrible and unlikable, but Trump has, pissed so many people off and has created this, hatred towards him That's a motivating force. And that's, without that, they can't do this with Kamala. They can't do any of it, right? And so, if you looked at I watched, a good portion of I scanned all of the Democratic National Convention, and, it's just like so hyped up and so dumbed down and so remedial, but that's where America is, right? And once these guys know that they can get away with something, they're not going to just hold pat. They're not going to, they're not going to check, they're not going to like playing poker. They're going to push their chips on the table and go for more. Like every time they get away with something from the American people, this is an American people problem, right? The American people are letting them get away with putting this person out there, and the Trumpers are helping. Like you helped by supporting this guy. It's like you're just being like selfish pricks. I don't think there's many Trumpers that watch my channel anymore, but they're being like selfish pricks because the rest of us don't want the guy, right? Even though even someone like me who really enjoyed the first 3 years of Trump's, I really enjoyed his election. It was my favorite political moment, even to this day. I was giddy for a week. My kids remembered it, just looking at the Rachel Maddows and all those people and how they had to eat shit when Trump won. That was great. Wonderful. And Trump's the first 3 years of presidency were hilarious. But the way he got worked on COVID, and he just, he stayed too long, and he displayed himself, and he just was a real scumbag, and just, he jumped the shark, and, the rest of us saw it, right? All the stuff he did. And it hurt all of us in the truth community, the censorship, and, it just was the division in the country and just the negative mood and everything. And you keep on pushing this guy out there when the rest of the people say, we don't want this motherfucker, right? They're telling you over and over again, not just the Democrats and the liberals who you hate, but the rest of us, people in the truth community, we're saying the guy sucks. Get rid of him, right? He's a fucking albatross. He isn't what you think he is. He's played you, and he's selfish, and he's never going to be accepted. He's never going to pass any legislation. He's never going to push anything through. He's going to be, it's going to be a contentious. If he wins re-election, America's going to be even worse than it is now. And you keep on backing him because you bought into some, complete illusion with the ketchup gate and these things as well. You never wake up. You're not a truth seeker. You're embarrassing yourself, right? You're embarrassment to humanity just by following this guy. You got to realize that the hatred that this guy creates in people on the other side is always going to be there. It's always, and it's not on them. It's not Trump derangement syndrome. They suck. Yeah, they suck horribly. But you suck too, and Trump sucks. So, it isn't like your suckiness and their suckiness, like your suckiness is going to win out. It's always going to be this way, right? You're better off having somebody who's a little bit more, you don't agree with them. They don't lie to you like Trump does. They don't pander you to like Trump does and all this stuff. Say the things that, pretend to be a truther when he's not, all these things, right? Because it's not real either way. You're never going to have a truther in there. You're never going to have anybody that, is anything other than just a person that doesn't rock the boat so much. It keeps things going without being too extreme one way or another. And that's what the Democrats have learned. They don't really run liberals because of that, the very fact that, they're not going to run a communist and a socialist or somebody because, the level of animosity, plus they'll lose the center. But, that's parts on you, like all the Trumpers. You're doing what Trump, you pushing this guy has allowed this thing with Kamala Harris to happen, right? Trump degrading the presidency, which I loved. I'm not a big fan of it, because the presidency does suck, has allowed them to degrade it even more on their end, the whole political process, and just skip the whole voting part. Like Kamala Harris has got 0 votes, and she's going into this, election, which, they're always rigged, but who knows what they're going to do here. And the powers that be, and, the Republicans, the Republican establishment don't like Trump. And the media doesn't like him. Fox News doesn't like him. And so, he's got no support really from the people that he needs support from. And that's what cost him the first thing with Fox News turning on him, right? Because, he pissed them off, right? He systematically pisses people off, throws them under the bus. Anybody who criticizes him, he's stupid. Like he's a moron. And you guys are morons for following him. Like it's just, at some point you got to realize it. But either way, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if he wins or she wins. This country's going to shit either way. So, go ahead, enjoy your Trump party, but realize there's no happy ending here. But with all that, they're now saying she doesn't even have to do interviews. And to a press that I mean, I'm going to probably say this over and over. I haven't shot the previous clip yet. I'm doing this the night before because I didn't want to forget all these things I was going to say. These things come to me, and then by the time some period goes by, I don't remember all the things verbatim. It's like it's just a stream of thought comes to me anyway. But she's not even doing interviews with the media that's like on her side 100%. Like, they're against Trump and they're for her, and she won't even do medias with shills anymore, right? Which I showed you that clip originally. And so, like, they're saying that now, like, it's okay that she doesn't even do interviews. Like, she's going to go to the debate or the election without doing any significant interview. Like, I mean, they even did Sarah Palin even did freaking interviews. Remember that shit? But they won't, they're saying she doesn't even have to do that. And the American people are like, sure, she doesn't. Like, we don't care. Like, they just say, it was fun. The convention was fun. And, they made it into a complete illusion. And the American people have bought into this illusion. So much so, and she's raising gobs of money. Again, didn't get one vote. She, lied about Biden. She knew he was senile from the debates. You could tell she knew in the debates. I showed the clips so many times, right? And so this person who is basically unelectable is now the front runner to win. Like she's, she may lose to Trump. I don't know what they're going to do without Trump. I don't think they're going to get rid of Trump. I don't know what the thing is, but like she has a legitimate chance to be president, and she doesn't deserve it at all. And like it's somebody who once she is president, and people are going to wake up and go, oh God, we hate this bitch, right? Like, I mean, even the Democrats, right? It isn't going to take long before she. I mean, it's like you married somebody and you didn't realize. There's that movie. It's with Ben Stiller called The Heartbreak Kid. I just looked it up. And he meets this girl. They fall like in love, and she's like perfect. And she turns out to be like an absolute freaking disaster. It's kind of funny, right? But that happens to people. Like they get married and they realize they didn't know the person at all. And the person is, within a short period of time. It happens to married couples after years and years even, right? Where they're like, oh, we're totally incompatible. And that's what's going to happen with Kamala Harris if if she becomes president. Like all those annoying tendencies and she's going to have to do interviews then, right? She's going to have press conferences, and maybe she won't. Like maybe the American people won't even care. The media is so damaged right now. And, I mean, it would make sense for someone like RFK Jr. who's getting unfair treatment from the media just to go on social media and try to use that where, all the viewership is anyway. No one's watching mainstream media anymore. But either way, that transition from a senile Joe Biden, a guy with dementia, who had dementia for, the whole electoral process, like in 2019, he had the whole time. And so they had that guy, elected him, and kept him there, the whole using COVID to, keep him in the basement and, do this where they didn't have to, have him campaign and be out there. I mean, at least Kamala's doing a little bit more of that, but she's not answering these tough questions. She's not, any of these things, right? And so, like they've did it once and they're doing it again, right? And Trump is, at his wit's end, right? But, and they got better at it, and they learned what they can get away with and how pacified the American people are. And that, I mean, it's kind of funny. It's, interesting, like how it shows you a barometer of where everybody is. Anyways, like if you look at it like that, it's entertaining as hell, right? Because they've just pulled off a massive, like, practical joke on the American people. And when they wake up and they're married to Kamala Harris, that's, that'll be, like, funny in itself. All right, let's get into the other stuff here. Okay, let's start here just quickly. Deion Sanders publicly bans reporter from asking questions. Not the Deion Sanders, his whole, the whole athletic program won't let this reporter ask questions because he's critical of Deion Sanders, who I like as a coach. I thought that was interesting last year. He put on sort of a spectacle, and college football sucks. So, I mean, I don't like it, but, he made it entertaining, right? But like this idea that you won't talk to reporters anymore, and you can ignore them personally, but they've banned the guy from the college, which just goes with, Kamala not doing interviews. Like you just, pretty much do anything. I mean, you have social media now, right? And, if you're going to be slandered like Kyrie Irving was, that's one thing. You know, the way Kennedy would. We'll get into Kennedy stuff here in a moment. But then this guy, right, sending a special birthday shout out to our favorite pup, Scout, 6/15/22, right? And then 10/19/22. And so in June he said that, and then in October he says this: couldn't think of a better way to spend a beautiful fall day than at the dog park. I know Scout enjoyed it. So this is in 2022 when he's the governor, and he's got 2 dogs named Scout. Look at this dog. Looks like some sort of a chocolate lab or a black lab or something, right? I don't know what it is. Don't tell me. Don't care. Don't need to know. And then this dog looks like, I don't know what that is. But they're clearly not the same dog, right? And also, you know, it's like I'm with my dogs every day. My dogs are sitting with me in my bed, right? They're a part of the show. Like they're here. I don't know. Buddy is here almost all the time. Like as soon as I get up in the morning, Buddy comes running in, jumps in bed. And he likes to be here for this. You know, he just likes to be in here. Tulsi comes and goes. She likes to be here in the beginning, and then she's always, you know, she hears a noise, and she's always, you know, she's more active. And Farley, my dog before that, was in the bed, you know, quite a bit while I did these videos. My wife had a dog named Farley, and, you know, I was here, and Farley was, you know, liked to be around people. And sometimes Wampus the cat was here. You know, Wampus has since disappeared. But they're a part of my existence in terms I go walking with them 2-3 times a day, right? I mean, we're regularly, they're in the picture with me, the whole thing, the picture I have. I guess I can put that in here maybe if I remember. You know, you guys have seen them, I talk about them. But I have an actual relationship with them. I gave the example of my wife and I were at the beach, and there was a young woman who was being filmed, like a high school college girl, who was filming, you know, her dad was filming her for Instagram or something as she played with her dog in the ocean. And I said to my wife, I bet she hasn't played with that dog in 6 years, you know, here or anywhere else, you know, or whatever. Like she's just doing it for a video to make herself look good or whatever, like this clown, right? He's using his dog as a prop to make him look like an average guy. This is a stage photo. You know, look, I'm a dog lover, right? You know, you're a lying piece of shit. Are those even your own kids, right? You're just a scumbag. Like you can't be trusted. You know, you're using your dog in a way, and you can't get the dog's name right? Like which one is Scout? Is that Scout or is this Scout? Or are all your dogs Scout? Or is this even like a CGI dog? Is that like not even really a dog? They just put it in there. Let's see this again.
You know something? If you had told us 1 year ago that we were going to come in third in Iowa, we would have given anything for that. And you know something? Not only are we going to New Hampshire, Tom Harkin, we're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico. And we're going to California and Texas and New York. And we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan. And then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House.
Yeah. So he's so weird. Like he's weird. Like, and he's the guy Howard Dean that was doing the interview, and Howard Dean was the first guy to figure out how to use the internet to get money and support. But they reeled him back in. So that's 2004, and John Kerry ended up being boring ass. John Kerry ended up being was it John Kerry? Who ran that year? I think it was John Kerry, who lost to Bush, W. Bush. And, you know, they reeled him back in, right? John Kerry was a member of Skull and Bones in Yale, as was Bush. Remember all that stuff. 2 guys who were Skull and Bones were running against each other. But Howard Dean, figured out the internet. And he was, all of a sudden the front runner, and they reeled him in. They screwed him, just like they screwed Bernie Sanders. And they, it was cheating and stuff. And then they ran that boring-ass John Kerry who put people to sleep and, failed miserably. But now he's defending Kamala Harris not doing interviews. So this is kind of a good interview with Kennedy. This girl asked a real question when Fox News is the beacon of like free press or like journalism, we're screwed, right? Fox News sucks when they're actually, they're talking to Kennedy because it hurts Kamala, but she asks these kind of like real questions here.
Welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Shannon, thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's get this out of the way up front. You and President Trump not always fans of each other. He posted on social media earlier this year, he's one of the most liberal lunatics ever to run for office. A phony radical left fool whose poll numbers are terrible and getting worse. The New Yorker said just a couple of weeks ago this, in a recent text exchange, Kennedy told one person that...
Look, this is what Trump's saying here. He just admitted that he was actually okay with the vaccine. He's saying that about Kennedy, right? And you Trumpers, love Trump so much. She's saying, Kennedy just admitted he was actually okay with the vaccine. She's not going to read that part. It's just not the highlighted part, right? But that's saying that he's being a hypocrite about what he believes, and all of it. Like this is classic Trump.
And getting worse. The New Yorker said just a couple of weeks ago this, in a recent text exchange, Kennedy told one person that Trump was a terrible human being, the worst president ever and barely human. He is probably a sociopath. Now, I haven't read your text, so you can speak to that, but how did you get from that position to Friday night?
Well, it became clear to me that I did not have a path to victory. 16 months of censorship, of not being able to get on any network really except for Fox.
The fact that these guys they can't get an interview with Kamala, but they wouldn't interview Kennedy, right? And I said this when Kennedy said he was going to win, and this was going to win. I said, "There's no way." And I don't think Kennedy's a legitimate, truther, and he wouldn't have done anything. He's handled because of his position on Israel, but just the stuff he was saying was so outside the bandwidth of things they'd let you talk about. There's no way they'd let him win, right? And they have a rigged system. That's why it's a rigged system, right? And he should know. Like, he's just figuring this out. Like, it's silly. This is a rigged system, and this is how they rig it, right?
And I had, in fact, when Ross Perot ran, in the 10 months that he ran, he had 34 appearances on the networks. I had 2 appearances in 16 months. So I was blocked out from the networks. I was blocked out from the debate.
But you can use social media. The networks are like just nobody watches this kind of news anymore. It's very limited. And even though there was 28 million people watching the convention, but there's hundreds of millions of people watching political shit on the social media every day. And so all you need is social media.
No path to victory. President Trump had been reaching out to me, and I talked to him a few hours after the assassination attempt.
Oh, Jesus.
We had a long conversation by phone. I then had 2 extensive meetings, and there were issues, the broad issues that were most important to me, the ones that brought me into the campaign, which was ending the Ukraine war, ending the censorship, and protecting children's health. We're all reforming our food supply, all the things that we need to do to make our children healthy again. Those are all things that President Trump also wanted to work on. And
I've never heard Trump say that once. Trump says stuff. My wife reminded me that Kennedy was going to be a part of his administration. And then Pfizer gave Trump $1 million, and I think Trump likes Kennedy. And I think he agrees with some of his stuff. Trump said he was going to do gun control. Remember, he had Dianne Feinstein in the White House, and they were having a meeting on gun control. And Trump was just like, "Oh, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do this. We'll do this." And she was like, I'm going to have like a ghoulgasm. She was, you can see the thing where she's meeting with, Trump on gun control. And I think it was Nancy Pelosi. Maybe it was Nancy Pelosi.
Under pressure after Parkland, President Trump taking on his own party and the National Rifle Association today.
And I'm a fan of the NRA, but that doesn't mean we have to agree on everything.
Mr. Trump at a freewheeling hour-long meeting with a group of bipartisan lawmakers trying to get something, anything done, appeared to embrace nearly everything he heard in the meeting, from confiscating guns from those deemed dangerous, a move opposed by many conservatives.
But take the guns first, go through due process second.
Holy shit, you see what he just said as president, right? This is him discussing policy. This isn't him on the campaign trail pandering to somebody. Did you hear what he just said? I missed it the first time. You know, I'm editing now.
Conservatives.
But take the guns first, go through due process second.
Holy shit, right? Take the guns first and then do due process second, right? Like that's not only about gun control, but that's about the criminal justice system. Due process is, you know, everything to do with your rights as a person to receive a fair trial. I mean, hear what he's just said? Like this guy, he just is brutal. I mean, he just talks and says stupid shit, but you know, you Second Amendment people, especially now that he's pretending he's been a victim himself. I mean, he's, you know, who knows what he'll do about the Ketchupgate thing. He can claim it's to protect him and the right-wing people, Trumpers, will go for it or whatever. I mean, who knows? Like, this guy cannot, he's a total snake, and he just, I mean, that's a huge statement he just said, right? Take the guns first. I mean, he's a gun grabber, right? And I'm not a big gun person. You know, I've talked about this. I think I talk about coming up here. You know, I'm editing right now. I think I said something about this yesterday. But this, you can't have this, right? You just can't have it, especially Republicans.
Embracing long-held Democratic ideas like universal background checks and increasing the minimum age to 21 to buy some weapons, even taking on red state Democrat Joe Manchin and Republican Pat Toomey for not including an age limit increase in their background check bill.
We didn't address it, Mr. President. Look, I think
You know why? Because you're afraid of the NRA, right?
No.
At times, wheeling and dealing in real time.
If you can add domestic violence, paragraphs, pages into this bill, I'm all for it. But can you add what Amy and what Diane have? Can we add them in? And I know you can add what John.
So look how happy she is, right? Like, they think they're going to get this done. Now, Trump turned on her. Like, she's so happy, right?
Yeah, I haven't.
Even pushing back against fellow Republican Steve Scalise, shot and nearly killed during a baseball practice last summer when Scalise suggested adding a measure involving a concealed weapons permit to a bill aimed at strengthening background checks.
You look at the concealed carry population.
We're talking about a whole new ballgame. You'll never get this passed. If you add concealed carry to this, you'll never get it passed.
The president also reaffirming his commitment to pass an executive order banning bump stocks, those devices that turn weapons into assault-style firearms. His message to lawmakers, the time to act is now.
I see some folks that don't say nice things about me, and that's okay. Because if you turn that into this energy, I'll love you.
Okay, so
I think it's time that a president stepped up, and we haven't had them, and I'm talking Democrat and Republican presidents. They have not stepped up.
Mr. President, the difference is this. There's not a person in West Virginia that believes that you're not going to defend their Second Amendment rights. Not a person. With you taking a lead on something like this, it gives them the comfort that something reasonable in this.
okay, so let's go to the Dianne Feinstein thing. But this is a problem. He just said it. The people in West Virginia won't be all triggered if you do it because they trust you, right? That's the problem with Trump in a nutshell. Because if a Democrat said something like this, the country would collapse on itself, right?
Conservatives.
But take the guns first, go through due process second.
So it starts off here.
Are nothing new. I asked for just a list of, you look at Columbine, Colorado, Bill Clinton was president. Virginia Tech, George Bush. Fort Hood, Sandy Hook, San Bernardino, Pulse nightclub, and so many more. It's ridiculous.
So he comes in hot, with the stuff. He asked Dianne Feinstein here.
But maybe we could make it much more comprehensive and have one bill instead of 15 different bills that nobody knows what's happening.
If we can get 60 votes for it, Mr. President,
I think you can. Honestly, I think, look, I really believe this is one of the things where you can actually get the 60 votes and maybe easily. Diane, do you have something?
Well, I do, Mr. President. You probably know this, but I became mayor of San Francisco as a product of assassination. I've been the victim of terrorist groups. The department gave me a weapon. They taught me how to shoot it, and we proceeded through the 1970s that way. What I've watched and seen is the development of weapons that I never thought would leave the battlefield, that are out on our streets. And the latest and newest, Mr. Chairman, is the AR-15.
Kaboom.
It's got a lot of assets to it, and it's misused. And it tears apart a human body with the velocity. And I've watched the school shootings in particular, which you pointed out. And I thought Sandy Hook, and I'm delighted that Senator Murphy is here today. We thought Sandy Hook would be the end, and he and I introduced another assault weapons bill after the first one. We didn't succeed with it, but the killings have gone on, the number of incidents have gone up, and I put my case in writing, which I will give you, if I may, in letter form.
Good. Thank you.
And secondly, the assault weapons legislation, this is the number of incidents before and of incidents and of deaths.
Right.
This is when the 10-year assault weapon ban was in, how incidents and deaths dropped. When it ended, you see it going up.
Okay.
So Senator Murphy
Take a look at it.
and 26 of us have co-sponsored a new bill. I would be most honored if you would take a look at it.
I will.
And we will get it to you and let us know what you think of it.
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris, go ahead.
So, he was just greenlighting everything. There might have been something later on with him. I saw, this exchange where she was so happy. Like at the end of it, maybe at the end. Maybe it's the end here. Let me see.
Well, Diane, you have some very good ideas. We all have, I think everybody, Marco, I know you have a lot. Fellas, if you could all get together, if we could put in one great piece of legislation, Chuck, I think that you're going to have an amazing result in the vote. The votes are hard to get in Congress. That's what's been happening. You're going to have an amazing result. People are going to be shocked to see the number. It's not going to be 60. It's going to be way above 60. I mean, it may be a number that nobody would even believe. People want to see something happen. But they want to see something good happen, too, not just another piece of, you didn't pass anything, let alone some good stuff. We want to pass something great. And to me, something great has to be where you stop it from happening. And I think there's only one way. But again, if you feel not to have that, you understand. I want a counter. I want a very strong counterpunch. Because if you have a strong counterpunch, they're not going in, and you're not going to have this problem anymore. Remember the 98% figure. 98% of these attacks, gun-free zones. No backlash. No death to them. Death to everybody else. But if you four could get together and do something and maybe set the foundation, add to the foundation where some of the great things said, we would have, we're going to have a bill. Steve, it's very hard to add the one thing that you want. I will tell you, I'm a fan. Let's consider it for a separate bill. We'll consider it for a separate bill. But again, we also want things that can be approved. You have to look at the age of 21 for certain types of weapons. Some people aren't going to like that, but you're going to have to look at that.
Anyways, there's some part of this thing, I'm not going to find it, but Diana Feinstein is so happy because Trump's saying everything she wants to hear from a Republican president, and then Trump just changed his mind, right? But he could change his mind again because of the fake thing that happened to his ear. Like, you never know with this guy, right? Trump will, turn on a dime and just, because this was the popular thing to say and whatever it was. And, Trump really doesn't understand the NRA, whatever. And then he went back and they were like, you can't do this. And then he was like, okay. And he just dropped all of it. None of this stuff happened, right? But Dianne Feinstein was in heaven for this meeting thinking it was going to happen. And it didn't, right? Because that's how Trump is. Trump will say things to you and say, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And he'll be able to articulate your point and say, oh, wow, it's a really good point on your part. And then he'll do the exact opposite. And that's what's going to happen with Kennedy. Okay, so we're going to get back to the interview in a second. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm having, things like big things happen in my, not personally, but, in my extended family, and I could talk about that at the sort of end of the video. But things are just coming up. This is what it's going to be like for the next period of time. But this person wrote this. First person wrote this. Since Ketchupgate, I think I've seen about 60 different videos from 50 different people that deep dive in every detail about that day, and every pointless obfuscation rabbit hole. I'm not going to go look at how to pronounce it. And this is maybe the third one total. They even so much as humored the idea that Trump was involved. It's so hopelessly pathetic and sad, right? That's what it's like. The truth community just sucks like that because they, so obviously. And then this person wrote like right below that, like, 10 comments below that, or before that, really. This comment came in first. I read them from newest to oldest. You're brain dead if you think Trump set up a shooting to miss by that narrow of a margin. And then there's an emoji. And I'm like, yeah, you don't get any of it, right? So you think that Trump would say, yeah, let's shoot at my head, just make sure you hit my ear. Like silly. Or any of it. Like that, it just, I don't know what to say about it. The other piece to this, which I want to get to because I want to get back to this interview with Kennedy. But I saw James Carville and some other guy, old Democratic guy, talking about Kennedy. And the other guy goes that, Kennedy is the worm that was eating Kennedy's brain died of malnutrition, saying that he's brainless, right? Where Kennedy's a smart guy, and he has truth or stuff. And people, are talking about, there's a comment saying Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk and Kennedy are all the same kind of part of the beast. Yeah, they are, but also, at least they're kind of flirting with the truth, right? And, none of it matters because we're all part of the beast and none of us is doing shit about it. Like, none of us is really, I'm doing things in terms of my spiritual work and preparing for the inevitable, but none of us are really, we're living our lives and enjoying the system is still here. And, very few people are doing anything more than talking. That's the issue. The system's collapsing and people are just running their mouths, including me. And, it's just there's not a lot of productive things happening. The system can't be saved, so that's part of it. But then, preparing for it, people are talking to me about Plan B, and I'm going to hopefully remember to make a voiceover talking about having a Plan B and what that means in the next video. But I might forget altogether, so who knows. But if I remember, it'll be there. But anyways, so they were talking about Kennedy, and they were having this idea that J.D. Vance is sucking, right? Like they're hiding him away because he's so weird, he's just failing. And so that Trump might drop him, and he likes Kennedy. And they're talking about what Kennedy might do for him and what a risk that would be or whatever. But the one guy, and they're talking about his conspiracy theories and all these things, It's just, it's so annoying. They're limited, and they're just so limited. And so narrow-minded, right? Because that's their shills, and that's what they're, They buy into all this stuff and just, or whether they buy into it or they just sell it, doesn't matter. Buying or selling, the official story. But in terms of what the guy said that's resonating with Kennedy is this thing with the chronic diseases, which I'm going to cover coming up, that, people are connecting with that because they see their kids and they see themselves. People's health is deteriorated since COVID and the bloop and all that. So the bloop and all that stuff, right? I have a bloop for swears and a bloop for the bloop. But anyways, let's get back to it here. So Kennedy, he should know this. Kennedy has no leverage, right? If he is polling from 2 to 5%, he's polling in single digits. They froze him out. And he's gotten to the point where people realize he can't win. And they're freaked out about Kamala Harris if they're, truthers or whatever, or they're freaked out about whatever it might be, right? And so they're thinking, all right, who's my, of the two people who have a chance to win, who's the better option for me, right? And so, he's running out of support, and he had a big bump in the beginning, and, plus his horrific position on Israel just killed his candidacy in the truth community and with the far left people, right? So, he has no leverage. So, he's like, well, Trump might do something that I care about. Like he doesn't want to be a spoiler. He's just saying that, well, here, let him say this here.
To form a unity government, we agreed that we'd be able to continue to criticize each other on issues on which we don't agree. But these issues are so important in their way of unifying our country. We need in this country to reach a point where we love our children more than we hate each other.
It's a good unifying theme that I think a lot of people could get around. It's how we get there. That's always the devil is in the details. Have you all negotiated over or talked about a cap?
Okay, so he didn't. He just says he doesn't. They haven't agreed to a cabinet position. Any of these things, right? He talked about how he reached out to Kamala Harris and there was nothing there. But this is the big thing I want to talk about here. This was kind of an interesting thing. At first, he said this here.
States they're basically as 10 swing states where my presence in the race would have helped Vice President Harris and would have harmed President Trump. So I'm going to get off the ballot in those states.
Okay, so and I'm not sure that's true or not. Maybe just, whatever. But if that's the case, that makes sense. So he says that she didn't want to listen to anything from him or any of the other third-party candidates.
To listen to anything from the Democrats that they were going to do something about the war, about the Ukraine war, about the censorship, about the child health crisis, this epidemic of chronic disease that has now disabled about 60% of our kids.
Okay, so that's a big statement, right? And I know that the health is bad and this stuff is coming up. Like my wife sent me that thing, I told you guys about that interview with these two healthcare whistleblowers that are pretty brutal about how corrupt the healthcare system is. There's that fake smile, and it's a real smile, but it's like the smile of death, like for you, like when she's smiling, you're hurting, right? So I trust Kennedy's data more than the mainstream, media's data on this thing, but I couldn't find any sort of verification of this. But we know the kids are much weaker, and let me just say these are some of the things that we can look into here. And so 18% of all children age 0 to 11 are on medication of some sort, prescription drugs. 27% of adults age 27% of adolescents age 12 to 19, and 46% of adults age 20 to 59, and 85% of adults age 60 and over used prescription drugs in the last 30 days, right? And that was from 2015 to 2016, those statistics. So, that's going to be much worse now. Well, here it says here, prescription drugs amongst children, adolescents, 19% of adolescents in 2013. Oh, this is old one. This is NIH stuff, right? Let me see if there's anything in the news about this. 20% of kids between the ages of 0 and 11, and then another, 25% between whatever that was. I said adolescent kids, and then kids between the, people between 18 and 20, 50%, and then going up, right, where it's towards the end of your life, almost everybody's on a prescription drug, which we know about. Like, so you're a lifelong customer, which Kennedy gets into here in the interview. And then there's 11% of kids have ADHD, which I think is much higher than that. So, 1 out of 10 kids is being diagnosed with ADHD. And I believe that's higher. I think that's another, game statistic, but they also, in terms of like autisms, it's like 1 in 24. And so you think about all these issues kids have, they're just not functioning very well. And there's health issues. Of course, depression set in. Something like 60% of kids were depressed during the COVID lockdown. So many things like that, right? And, they're not doing well. Everyone knows it. And it's not being discussed because Kennedy will never say it because he doesn't either know or he's, just being a shill. But this is what they want, right? They want to depopulate. They want to dumb down the, they want to pacify and make weaker the humanity. Like this, we're in crisis. There's economic crisis. There's overpopulation. The system is crumbling, and their biggest fear is the masses turning on them. So to pacify the masses and make them more dependent, and they're trying to get kids to buy into this Agenda 30 and all these things. And so of course they have to be sick and weak and stupid and entitled and pathetic and dependent and emotionally messed up and like all these things that are happening. They're dousing these kids with all these various chemicals and Wi-Fi and all the rest of it. That's just destroying these kids and weakening the crap out of them. and that's not going to stop. And no president's going to change anything. And no, I mean, it's like the food. It's like all the things Kennedy's listing. At one point, you go, "This is intentional, right? It's not just neglectful; it's intentional." Like he's saying, well, they're life. He's going to say they're lifelong customers. Yeah, that's true, but also they're completely pacified. People like that can't rise up and do anything, and that's necessary for what's the deal that these kids are going to get is so much worse than the deal we got, because when there's a reduction, when you go from having to not having, it's the hardest adjustment, right? From not having to having is also hard. Like from being poor to rich it's hard, but from going from being rich to poor is really hard on people, and most people can't even make that adjustment, right? They're just feeling so entitled, and they become so accustomed to their lifestyle, they can't do it. And so this is the outcome, right? Like all of us, we're screwed. Like whatever, we're not going to accept the deal that these kids will, and they're going to deal with us whatever way they deal with us through these catastrophes and wars and all the breakdown of the system, and we'll just have to accept it when the power goes out, and we'll either deal or we won't, right? But these kids are being totally groomed for another type of lifestyle, one that is like so demonic and so, like inhuman, that all of us who didn't grow up with it and weren't prepared or groomed for it, we will no way be able to accept it, right? But anyways, let's get back to it here. He said one more thing here.
Of our kids, and when my uncle was President Shannon, only 6% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, over 60% do. And, it's hard to find a kid today that's not been damaged by it. And it's coming from our food supply, from pollution in our environment, from toxics in our environment, and mainly from corruption in our government that allows that to happen.
You've talked about, or there's been discussion that if you were to join the Trump administration in some health-related position.
I think it's here where he says it here.
Wouldn't dismantle them. I would change the focus, and I would end the corruption. Right now, 75% of FDA's budget is coming from pharmaceutical companies. That is a perverse incentive. In NIH, scientists and officials in NIH who work on drug development, who incubate drugs for the pharmaceutical company, get to collect lifetime royalties from those products. These are regulators. They're supposed to.
I talked about this, right? So if you work on a study and you work on something that is then used in some pharmaceutical drug on the NIH, you get royalties on this. Fauci and all these people, right? On you have like a patent on it, and so they get paid, funded by the pharmaceutical industry, and this is a federal institution. And then you experiment with things. If somebody uses your experiment, you could be set for life with royalties, right? If it's used in these medications, and then of course the NIH will then push the medications, right?
Supposed to be looking for problems in those products. We have these agencies that have become sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate. So they're not really interested in public health. Everybody, the most profitable thing today in America is a sick child. Everybody's making money. The hospitals are making money. The pharmaceutical companies are making money. Even the insurance companies make money.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying, right? You have a sick kid, and like I said, that this is for-profit medicine, and that these certainly old elderly people. I saw this with my parents, particularly my dad. They just keep you alive long enough to use up all your insurance and all your money, and then they let you die, right? And so, it's for-profit medicine, and every medicine they give you has side effects, and they're just treating the symptoms, and they're able to prop you up from organ failure or this, that, and the other thing in terms of all these issues that you have that might otherwise kill you, but you're not living a real life. You're like a zombie with all of it, right? And so, people just aren't allowed to die in a dignified manner anymore. You could choose out of the system. But if you go with the mainstream medical system, this is what happens. But now that they can get these kids young, having chronic illnesses, being dumbed down, it affects their IQ, affects their strength, their inner strength, who they are as a person. They became weak and pathetic and dependent, all the things that we see with each generation as each generation gets weaker, right? And so this is, a big part of that, and it's purposeful. It's the food, it's the drug, all the things he's talking about, which we know to be true, right? It's like madness. I want to get to some more of this at the end. I got one more thing to show you here with Kamala.
I was Attorney General. I learned that the California Department of Corrections, which was a client of mine, I didn't get to choose my clients.
Right, a client of the Attorney General.
A client of the Attorney General,
Right.
of the Office of Attorney General, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need. And I believe it was not only, I know it was historic in California, but I believe actually it may have been one of the first, if not the first in the country, where I pushed for that policy in a Department of Corrections.
Okay, so the issue there is these are prisoners, and prisoners cost a lot of money to, let's get the whole thing here, the whole, both people involved. And so prisoners cost people lots of money, and they're criminals, right? And so it's not something that people are psyched about paying, and there's for-profit prisons, it's a whole thing. And she was trying to, get people out of prisons, all the things she was doing, but putting, people in. I mean, she was back and forth on all these things, right? But if you're a person, whatever you feel about transgender and whatever you feel about this issue, right? Whether you're, liberal for it or conservative against it, this is an elective surgery. Like, this is like getting some sort of cosmetic surgery, like, a facelift or a boob job or whatever it is, right? This is, usually things your insurance wouldn't pay for it. But if you're a transgender person in the California prison system, the taxpayers, right, who fund the prison, are going to be the ones who have to pay for it, and they can be from $20,000 to $100,000 plus all the meds, all the hormones that go with it, all these things, right? And so if she's talking about paying for a person's transition, that's, the taxpayers are on the hook for that. It's also an incentive for a transgender person to commit a crime and do some time in prison and get this surgery, right? Again, you're still going to prison, but if you didn't have the money to do this, it would mean that by going into a prison situation, you commit a crime where you get 2 years, even something small like that, and then, you get this surgery for free, right? This very expensive surgery that most people can't afford. So here is a Blade, America's LGBTQ news source. Despite Harris deal, few surgeries granted to trans inmates in California. Classic Kamala Harris, she puts these programs in and they don't work, right? They end up not working. Senator Kamala Harris' presidential campaign said Tuesday, anti-trans bias may play a role in the implementation of a policy she helped create under pressure to provide transgender inmates in California with gender reassignment surgery after a Washington Blade public records request found only 7 prisoners got the male-to-female procedure out of 130 who asked. Harris, a supporter of LGBTQ rights, nonetheless continues to be asked about her work as California Attorney General in litigation seeking to deny gender assignment surgery to transgender inmates in a state prison system, and the data indicated that Harris cast the settlement in a rosier light than it ended up playing out, right? And so she can't even do that right. Like, she forces this controversial policy, and the majority of taxpayers aren't going to want to pay for this, right? Like, people don't want to pay for other people's, whatever, like with other people's health care. It's a big deal for people. Like, they're paying exorbitant taxes in California, so it's the highest tax states. I mean, with the Biden tax, the taxing, for rich people, they're paying like 70% of their income, 65 or 68% of their income between California tax and the federal tax that Biden was trying to pass through. people making more than $400,000 a year. It de-incentivize people being wealthy, right? Or they have to find some way around the system. And so, this is, she can't even do that right. And so the whole thing is just classic Kamala, right? Just an absolute mess. See, the thing with Kamala and Trump, they're the worst kind of posers because they really believe in nothing. They have no dogma. They have no moral compass. They have no, rules to live by. They don't have anything like that, right? It's just pure self-promotion. I mean, they're so similar in this way, right? And so Kamala Harris makes this, arbitrary rule, like without, going past any legislation and say, going through the California state legislature and even the governor, she just makes a rule as district attorney that all these prisoners who want to transition, the government should pay for it, right? But there's no budget for it. She can't allocate money for that, right? The prisons are operating on a fixed budget, and like all those type of institutions, they don't have surpluses. They spend every dime they're given, right? And so you add another, what was 130, right? 130 of these prisoners applied for this transition, right? And, that might even be I don't know what the ratio is or whatever. And they only paid for 7 of them. But if they had paid at $100,000 a clip, that's $13 million, right? These prisons have an extra $13 million laying around, so they don't have the money to pay for it. Like, she does this kind of shit with full knowledge that they're not going to be able to do it. There's no budget for it. As soon as she's gone, there might be a more conservative person in her job. The legislature might come out and veto it, whatever it is, right? There could be citizens who rise up against this rule. And, that has to go through the bean counters who are budgeting for these prisons, say, we don't have the money to do this, right? They're scratching their heads going, how can you do this without giving us extra money to pay for it? So, it's a whole thing, and she just arbitrarily does it so she can go and sit down in this interview and say how wonderful she is to trans people. But the trans people are like, well, it's not effective. They see her as a poser. You didn't follow through, and like now she's a national figure running for president, so she's not going to be able to do anything for this rule in California. And, it's a whole thing. And it pisses off the conservatives, but that's how she rolls. Another thing that someone left a comment about this, and I'm going to cover it towards the beginning of my next video. And there was a bunch of people who had been abused by priests in San Francisco who had put together a strong case, and the attorney general or the district attorney before her was going to prosecute these priests in the Catholic Church, and she just failed to do it. And it makes no sense it makes no sense, right? Because she, she was in a liberal San Francisco that would have no problem with doing this to the Catholic Church, and it made total sense for her to prosecute these priests, and she just refused to do it. Who knows why that is? Like, it's just like flipping a coin. Like, one day Trump is talking to the NRA and talking about, gun rights and conservative blah, 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 blah. Next thing he knows, he's saying, well, let's grab the guns first and do the due process second. Like, it's just, like, there's no rhyme and reason with these complete posers, right? They have no, there's nothing inside of them. There's no, there's no system of consistency or any kind of, like I said, moral compass and ethics and, rules to live by where they can navigate through life. They just look at every situation as what it means to them and their, ambitions and things. Like, they're just like the worst type of people to be politicians. And of course they are politicians. They're both running for president, right? Okay, so there are some follow-up things here. Don's Dreams, Gotta Limit First Amendment. This was front page Huffington Post. And then it was, we'll make it constitutional. Trump again calls for jail time for burning American flag. They say, sir, that's unconstitutional, the former president said. We'll make it constitutional. Now, this is another time where Trump just like, the flag sucks. It's stupid. Flags, for the most part, are, they're archaic symbols, right? They've been used for, thousands of years in, various types of, governments, even tribal situations. And, it's just a way to mark a like a, like claim territory or whatever it might be. But they're not like the symbols that the American flag isn't the symbol that so-called patriots want it to be. So Trump is saying something here that hurts him because in reality, see, they're saying here that he wants to limit the First Amendment. Zuckerberg says Biden officials were wrong to pressure Meta to censor COVID posts. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it. So it wasn't just COVID, but it was things that were critical of Biden. And we know that they did things that were unconstitutional. They pressured social media and it hurt all of us in the truth community more than anybody else. They pressured the social media to censor us, right? And so, that was reality, that Biden is the one that was against the First Amendment. Now, Trump says stupid, loud stuff, and and this thing with the flag is, part of it, right? But what the Democrats are trying to do is rearrange reality and paint Trump as make Trump responsible for what Biden did, right? They're trying to reclaim all the words, all the talking points, and reverse the thing. Because Trump had all this momentum with Biden being senile, but now Trump's the old one, right? And then all these other things, which, is kind of a brilliant strategy on their part. And they learned that from Karl Rove. That's how he got George W. Bush elected. So it's something that the Republicans kind of invented. Just like with Fox News, they've stolen all the things that the Republicans do. A lot of the evil stuff. And I want to talk about evil at the end of this video. So Chuck Schumer got annoyed with then Senator Kamala Harris, right? Look at him. Turn the music off. See? He puts his hand out. He's like, just stop, whatever the fuck you're doing. And look at her expression. This expression is great here. She's like a schoolgirl or somebody who's being naughty and then making fun of her dad or teacher or something, right? Like he's just totally annoyed, like she's laughing and being loud and, calm down. This is like a real procedural thing. So, classic. Like he didn't even like her, like nobody does. Of course, Chuck Schumer's no treat either. And then there's this here.
Well, what we really need is a feminine nominee. A what? A feminine nominee. Well, what we really need is a feminine nominee. A what?
Gretchen Whitmer can't get her line. She can't do it. She's like, what is she, like 6'4"? These are all these Democratic governors, this annoying stuff. There's another thing that's similar to this here. So this is from Stephen Colbert's show. This is Nancy Pelosi. It's just weird, right?
States. I think our country would be different in many ways. One, we would be willing to embrace the idea that we actually have an incredible talent pool in these United States. And the talent that we have, they're in Detroit, they're in Kansas, they're in San Francisco, they're in inner cities and rural areas, and they are the youth of our communities who simply want to be engaged and need the resources, need the infrastructure, and need the resources to really be able to learn those skills that will allow us to compete in a larger world. So at the end of the 8 years, the other thing that would happen is that we would have a population of people who were informed not only about the great history of our country, but also world history, so that we would be able to...
Like we know that she's not informed of world history, but she said some stupid shit before. Remember when she was describing Ukraine? Let's see if I can find that.
Communicate with and compete in terms of the economy with other countries in a way that would allow us to thrive and to be the best that we can be and really be true to the ideals of our country. And at the end of the 8 years, I believe that we all would decide proudly that we are all, as Americans, patriots. And I define, by the way, patriotism.
Jesus. Like she's just always been annoying.
If you're watching any level of news, even social media, you're seeing everything that's going on right now in the Ukraine. Break it down in layman's terms for people who don't understand what's going on and how can this directly affect the people of the United States.
So Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade.
So, you know, I mean, Kamala Harris can be smarter than this, right? I mean, she's often dopey. She's often a dingbat, as my wife calls her. But she's can be smarter than this. But this isn't so much about her as it is what she thinks about the American people, right? So she thinks the people watching this, and this seems to be some sort of a, like a hip-hop kind of a urban, you know, like some kind of a, you know, Quay in the Morning type of thing, right? One of those hip-hop sort of, you know, radio shows or something, right? Podcast. And so she thinks these people don't know what Russia is. Like, all right, Ukraine is less known. Like, you can say that Americans might know before the Ukrainian war, might not know what Ukraine is, right? But every American probably knows what, like Sarah Palin, I can see Russia from my house, right? Like most people should know where Russia is. You know, so she either thinks the youth and or these urban type of people don't know what the fuck Russia is, right?
And how can this directly affect the people of the United States?
So Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
again, like, they used to be one country, right? This was the breakup of the Soviet Union, all these things. And, you know, to say it's a country in Europe is, you know, it's really part of what would be called Asia, right?
And it goes against everything that we stand for.
So, you know, does that happen? The morning hustle, right? And so, you know, like, that's what she thinks of the people while listening to the morning hustle. So finally here,
I designed a 3D printable phone stand that folds up like a breakdancer. It works because I hit a gear mechanism in the butt, and even though it's got some amazing dance moves, I need a hand judging them, so let me know which one gets a perfect 10 in the comments.
So Ray Gun isn't going away. Ray Gun is, you know, her infamy continues. A lot of my viewers have been comparing Kamala Harris to the that other famous, whatever she was, the Haktua girl, right? And so they're calling her Kamala Haktua or something. I like knee pads Harris personally. But anyways, one more thing here, and then I got a long voiceover about evil. And there was this, well, let me just show you. This is from some MSNBC this morning, I think.
Around when Donald Trump and his allies falsely accused the voting companies and election officials of rigging the election. So they're trying to be proactive this year. They don't want a repeat of 2020, and they are fighting the disinformation head on. We've talked many times about those massive defamation lawsuits that they've brought against Fox News and other Trump allies. Those could make for a big payday, but they're also hoping that there will be some deterrence there. Maybe, hopefully discouraging some of these bad actors and say, you know what, if you lie this time around, you might have a big price to pay. Another company that's not as well known, but it's actually a bigger voting technology company called ES&S. I've learned from several sources there that they actually forced all of their employees to submit their social media for a background check. The company wanted to scrub to make sure that no one had any publicly available political posts that could be weaponized later on if things go poorly after the election.
You know, as I've been saying recently, the system is rigged. It's not that the voting is rigged, it's the system that's rigged, right? It's not that the elections are rigged, the whole system's rigged. You know, the Trumpers and this whole narrative, and it's all performative, and it's part of the show, you know, this whole thing that happened. You know, all of it. The election, there's no election integrity, and there really hasn't ever been. And now with these computerized voting machines that would easily be manipulated and hacked and can disappear ballots, but there's always ways to cheat, right? Both people would cheat. I mean, when the there's one Democratic official that came out and said, yeah, we cheated, but we had to because we couldn't let Trump win again, right? And Trump would cheat. Trump's always cheated. He's tried to rig the world in his favor using money and influence and power, just like all these other people. They all suck, right? But for these companies to be censoring their employees and saying, you can't post any political opinions on social media, and they're working for, these companies that are supposed to be preserving democracy, and they won't even let their employees exercise their free choice of speech and political opinions, right?
Also, Jim, this company actually had a training session for its employees last year before Thanksgiving. Here's what you do when your friends and family pester you about the 2020 election and pepper you with false claims and conspiracy theories. So that's the disinformation front. But also, there are real security threats. Just yesterday, the Justice Department announced charges against a man in Colorado who allegedly threatened to kill election workers in that state. These companies and the election officials that I spoke to said that they are boosting spending on physical security, not just cyber security, but physical security to make sure that their employees are safe. Also, one company that I spoke to said that they are providing panic buttons, wearable panic buttons, like a life alert, to election officials in 5 states so that they can wear them on a lanyard while they're doing their job, just in case anybody tries anything crazy or freaks out at the polls. They press the button and it calls 911. So we've really descended deep into the hole. But a lot of people, Jim, are hoping that with these proactive measures, it will be a lot safer and more straightforward this time around.
Almost sounds like a bank teller, pushing the button at the bank if somebody's trying to rob the bank. That is really stunning stuff. All right, Marshall Cohen, a very important reporting. Thank you very
Okay, so I want to talk about evil. I'm very aware of it, like just being up after watching the Democratic National Convention, and then just, I've had this, there's going to be like 2 complimentary voiceovers that are going to go up on my Gratefullness meditation channel and probably my backup channel that will be also a part of the Journey series. That's right now just for members. Because it just, I'm putting out too much content. And other reasons. But anyways, so there's things that are going on in my personal life, not so much to do with me and, my, direct situation, with my wife and my son or whatever. But my wife's got a relative who got turbo cancer. Somebody who's a, very liberal Democrat and who, my wife tried to talk to about, these things, and that person's got turbo cancer. They had, they had cancer in remission, and then they were very enthusiastically getting the poop, and the roosters, right? And got turbo cancer, is dying poorly, right? Like cancer in the brain, cancer in the lungs and lymph nodes, right? Just the whole thing. And, was going through the death process and just not doing well at it. And I'm not going to talk more about that. But, so that was going on. And then we got news yesterday, of something that's kind of even worse that we're dealing with. Again, to do with, my wife's family. And so, there are things like that are like everybody's going through, right? There's just stuff like that. Because we're living in a time where things are coming to the surface. And, I've never watched a convention like I watched the Democratic convention. And even afterwards, somehow I was watching like one of the news is CNN or MSNBC. And Michelle Obama came out and just absolutely lied about Trump in some bizarre narrative, right? And they were applauding her for giving a good speech. I'm like, this is a horrible speech. And, she's, odd. I mean, she's got huge, long arms and, the masculine features and all those things. And, it was just like a debauchathon over there, like a freak show over there at the DNC. And I really, covered it more intensely because of this thing that happened where Kamala Harris is getting elected with no votes and the way that the DNC manipulated all these things, right? And, I was thinking about this in terms of like, it just seems like everything's like really evil. You know, just like their evil is just more prevalent. It's just really up. And, you know, I want to talk about this because most people have a childish and primitive view of evil because of a system has wanted it that way. So the way that most people, well, all of us get introduced to the idea of good and evil is that there's a hero, and that hero is 100% good. And there is a villain, and that villain is 100% evil. And when you watch a movie, most people identify with the hero. And they frame the narrative so that you're connecting with the hero and you're rooting for the hero to succeed. And, you can watch a movie where two historical figures are in an adversarial. You can just watch two movies where two historical figures, let's say it was like Edison and Tesla. And Tesla, there's a movie recently about this, the current war, something like that, the current war or something. And, Tesla was cast as the protagonist. And Edison was cast as the villain, which is kind of the narrative that's out there, right? Which electricity, AC, alternating current, or direct current was going to be used. And they went with the bad one, right? Like, so there's been these wars like Beta versus VHS in terms of the videotape, something like this. But then they could make another movie where Edison is the hero and Tesla is the villain, right? I saw a video, two movies. One was done by Germany, and the other one was done by America. And it was about the Rothschilds family. One was done by Hollywood, which favored the Rothschilds family. You can watch these movies. I really got a lot out of them. The other one is a German movie that the Rothschilds were evil. And in the Hollywood version, the big story is how the Rothschilds came to power. They were bankrolling, like there was Rothschilds banks. They had brothers. These brothers each had a bank. One was in France, and one was in Germany, and one was in England, and then there were two other banks somewhere else. I forget what. And the one that was in England was bankrolling the English war. This guy who became this was the primary Rothschilds bank, and the other one was bankrolling the French in the French war. They were, there was a war between the English and the French, and they were both Napoleon, and they were both, the Rothschilds were making that, happen. And so the French battled the English, and the English won. But the news came back to England that France had won, right? And in the American version, Rothschilds didn't know this was fake. And so the British government's stocks plummeted, right? Not their stocks, their bonds. Like governments issue bonds, and their bonds became worthless. And Rothschilds, being the patriot he was and loving England so much, he bought up all the bonds, right? Which makes no sense. Like, it just doesn't. This is how he became the richest man in the world. But in the other version, he had word that England had actually won. And either he sent out disinformation that France had won, or somehow it came back that France had won. But he knew England had won. And he bought up all these bonds for next to nothing, and then he owned the English government after that. Because he had, majority majority stake in the, in the government in terms of these bonds. And he became, of course, a knight and the richest man in the world. He became the first billionaire because of that, right? This family. And it was two different ways of looking at it. One where he was portrayed as a hero, and the other where he's portrayed as a villain. And when you watch movies, you get sucked in because your mind is in the passive alpha mode, and you just get sucked into the narrative, and they can, warp any. I mean, they have serial killers now that are the protagonists, right? That show Dexter and these other movies and things. I mean, they have the worst people, where they made Maleficent the hero. They started to do this with Disney movies. Well, all of a sudden, Maleficent, who was a villain in, I guess, what is it, Sleeping Beauty or one of those other movies, was now the hero. And they made two of these, right? And, you know, there was a story, Angelina Jolie came out. She had always wanted to be like in a Disney kind of movie. And she came out as Maleficent with all these little kids thinking that they were going to like her because she was the hero in the movie. And when they saw her, because she's dressed up like freaking Baphomet, they just were repelled. These kids were naturally like, you know, she's evil. Like, you look at her, she's evil. Like, that's what what evil looks like, right? You know? And she thought she would be, you know, like one of these Disney princesses or something. The kids were, you know, like running for the hills, right? But that's how they can warp these narratives. And I've watched a number of various, like, historical shows on Netflix and some of these other networks that are very graphic in nature. You know, I just watched this thing, Marco Polo. It's very graphic. And it's, you know, and the horrors that these people do to other, you know, the historical horrors. You know, it's about the Khan, you know, the guy who's the ancestor of Genghis Khan, and he's a horrible person. They're all horrible, right? And they're all doing evil. Like, both sides are both evil. Like, you can't say there's anybody to root for because they're just all, like, they're disregard for human life and torturing people. You know, they're breaking the feet of these young girls that use this Chinese tradition to break the arches so that the ball of the foot meets the heel and some kind of, like, I mean, deforming them. You know, of course, we know about, like, genital mutilation. I mean, there's just ways that people have of torturing their kids and torturing people, enslaving people, and just, like, these torture devices. You know, I've watched the Vikings, and, you know, my wife and I just watched this, you know, another version of King Arthur and some of these other things. And it's just the torture that people do. You know, burning people alive, like, you know, all these horrible things, right? And just, it's just bad stuff, right? And, you know, like things that are like abominations. And that's gone on forever. There's 28 million like legitimate slaves, people who are owned in the world right now. 28 million, like, that's a lot of people, right? And, you know, there's other forms of slavery that's more prevalent, of course, wage slavery, but just all the deviant and evil things and people's predisposition to doing twisted, horrific things to other people or the environment, building weapons of mass destruction. And, you know, there's just an evil nature that exists in people. There's also good, but then there's evil. And there's never one situation where there's good people and bad people, because that's part of the problem, is that people who are themselves evil think they're good, and that they're the good guys, and the people that they're against are the bad guys and the evil ones, and they deserve to be punished. And so they justify their evil because of the other people's evil. Because the nature of evil is, it's not your body, right? So if you think about God and love and good and, you know, evil and the positive qualities and the negative qualities, when your body dies, all that stuff leaves it. You know, people go, I'm going to go piss on his grave or dance on his grave or whatever. But the reality is, you know, the part of the person that you're mad at, whatever person, you know, their life force. You know, I talked about when I was 10 years old and I saw my grandfather's corpse, you know, at his funeral, and he wasn't there. I was like, that's not him. You know, they put lipstick on this guy who was like a, you know, old school tough guy, fought in a couple wars and, you know, all this stuff. But I was like, that ain't him. He's gone. Like, that's just, you know, that's his shell. Like, he's shedding his shell, you know, his whatever it was. And, you know, I couldn't articulate it because I was a 10-year-old kid, but, you know, everything that you are goes with you. And this is the idea of samskaras, which is by far the best explanation, you know, impressions that you take with you that have energetic, you know, element. It's like storage. It's like, you know, your etheric soul has a storage of your life, right? And your decisions go with you, and your addictions and your good things and your bad things. And, you know, the next life that you live, that stuff's coming back with you when you incarnate back in your physical body. The stuff that you leave with when you die, your impressions, you know, all the things that, you know, the things that you're accountable for, you know, the debts you owe, the things that you've done that you need to resolve, you know, any issues, addictions. If you die an addict, you'll be born and you'll have a life that's going to lead you to addiction because you didn't master that. You didn't overcome that. You didn't process it, right? Like, you know, you have to do something about it. If you commit suicide, then your next life you have a prevalence of, you know, you'll have a a life that will lead you to wanting to commit suicide again, right? And so these patterns of behavior are with you and you're taking them with you. And so everything's accounted for. And anger and fear and paranoia and, love and hate and, all these things, right? Happiness and joy and, all the things that you would experience as a person and the things that you were, focused on, the things that, dominated your personality, they're going to come back with you, right? And they're going to form something. Like there's going to be, your soul's going to plan something, is going to have some, masterful plan on how to deal with these things and process them and come back to a pure state, come back to a state where, all these things, it's like things that you take with you with a video game, right? Like you're in a video game and you die, right? Like your avatar dies and you come back and you have a new life. In that new life, you still have the knowledge and experience that you've gone through the various levels of the video game, and whatever things that you've brought with you, whatever assets and things that you've accumulated, and of course deficits as well in terms of your soul. These video games where you have weapons, like say that you bought, you earned these things, and then you die, and you still have these things when you come back, right? These potential assets to help you win the game, and so that's like a remedial version of real life and how it works. And so evil exists inside people, whatever that is, right? All these things exist. And, evil, good, evil, love, hate, these things that are there, right? All the things that are, part of your internal makeup. And it isn't your body. It's in your physical body. And it relates to your ego, obviously, and not your soul, because you have your ego and your soul. And your ego is where all these human type of emotions and the lower level emotions like love and compassion and empathy and divinity that's there within your soul are the pure higher things, and they're associated with your heart. And the lower level emotions are associated with your gut, and of course your mind is cunning, and your mind is strategizing in these things, and is it has to be influenced by one or the other. So if you are somebody who is focused on the lower level of tendencies of, fear and anger and lust and, all the negative, like things that people consider the sinful things, your appetites, right? Pleasure and, all these things, addiction, which are associated with your gut and your impulsivity, right? And immaturity that's there. And that's why you feel all these things in your gut level in terms of your expression on your physical body. And then your soul resides in your heart, also where all this stuff is accumulated in terms of your actions and things. But anyways, this stuff all resides in you etherically. And I talked about this in my book. I had written a workbook, and it was Transforming Abuse, right? A soul-driven existence. And, because I worked with this in terms of being a counselor, a clinician in treatment centers with sex offenders and, all these types of things, the assault cycle. And, I came to understand that it's like a computer virus or a physical virus. Evil is injected into people in trauma, right? And so, like you take something like physical abuse or sexual abuse or emotional abuse or these things where people mistreat other people. And a person who has been abused themselves and has been injected with some sort of evil virus then does it to somebody else, like a sex offender has been sexually offended and has had some sort of sexual abuse, and they have this virus in them, and then they offend other people, other kids, whatever it is, right? And then those people now have that virus, and there's a thing called the trauma outcome process, right? There's a few things that we use to look at this. There's one thing called the assault cycle, which was a series of steps a sexual offender would go through before offending. It always started with victim statement. And this could be applied to any wrongdoing, criminal behavior, where you have a poor me, a victim statement, where you feel like you've been wronged. Criminals and people who indulge in the most evil are always victims. And they're abusers because they're victims, right? Because they have an abuser and a victim inside of them. They've been victimized, but now they also have the experience of the abuser. You had an abuser in your life, and you've internalized that person, right? And whatever that is, it could be like a tyrant, right? Like a governmental tyrant and abuses the people, and all those people internalize that abuse, and then the soldiers, the foot soldiers, and the minions that do all the evil bidding for the abusive person who leads the country, a demonic king, and the whole country suffers from abuse and trauma and things, and other countries are invaded, and the horrors of war, right? When talking about these ancient civilizations, but it happens in war. There's a movie called there's a movie about a tank called Fury, and there's like all this evil stuff these guys, American soldiers, are doing. The sort of raping and pillaging that happens in these, in wartime, right? The war has been described as the absence of God, right? Where evil exists. My brother went to Vietnam, and he told me all these stories of things that he experienced, and then he became a counselor for veterans in the late 90s. And he told me these stories that these veterans were traumatized with. They were living with these things that they had seen, and some of the things, I mean, like they're, I would say just the story itself is traumatizing. That people would do these kind of behaviors, right? The vets themselves, or things they witnessed their fellow soldiers doing, and things that the people there were doing. And these countries that are, I mean, we haven't experienced being invaded yet, but when we do, and you see the kind of depravity that slips in, and evil sweeps through these countries, right? And it's just people, the worst kind of behaviors that exist inside people come out. And they're all inside of you. That's the thing. They're inside, they're internalized things, right? And so when somebody gets abused by somebody, the abuser injects this evil virus into them, or whatever it is, right? Not just abuse, any of these things. When evil is done to you by somebody, it's like it's injected into your system, and now it's part of your ego. And how do you cope with it? This trauma outcome process I talked about. And you can like hurt yourself, like if you've been abused. So you can pay the evil forward and abuse somebody else. You can cope with it, or you can hurt yourself, right? Like you can hurt yourself, and hurting yourself or hurting somebody else is like, you think, well, hurting yourself is somehow better. Well, but that in itself becomes something, right? I lived with this with my ex, who was constantly threatening suicide and, cutting herself and things like this. And it became, traumatic for all of us, my kids and me and the family, because she wasn't able to cope with her, her victim consciousness from her parental abuse and things that she had suffered, right? The only healthy solution is to find a way to get rid of the energetic abuse, which I, dealt with in this workbook, which, I'm never going to, I would have to go back and rewrite the whole thing. But I knew quite a bit about it, and, it has to do with the Sajmark method of meditation, the cleaning. But how do you deal with trauma that happens to you when you get evil injected into your system? And we all are getting that every day, because it's in our media, it's in our world. We have our, everything that's so demonic and degraded, and people want to look at it like the right-wing people want to look at it like it's just coming from the left, because they're the good guys, and you've been programmed to believe that you're a Christian and you're a right-wing person and you're a good guy, and the liberals are the bad guys. But when the Christians dominated this country, the Christians have done a lot of evil. The Crusades and all the other things, right? They had armies, and the armies did bad things, and the religions themselves did bad things, torturing people, sexual abuse, all this stuff. Like, these religions have been bad because they've corrupted, and they've gone to an egotistical, evil dark side, and the governments that support them. And so there's no good guys here, right? It's how you personally deal with evil, and then people collectively. Because you're going to come across evil in your life, and it's going to be done to you. It's going to be injected into your system. And it's going to take the form of hatred and anger and, fear and whatever it might be. And then how do you process that? And how do you, not engage in those behaviors and justify those behaviors because the other people are evil, right? That you have to die, you have to fight fire with fire, you got to fight evil with evil, and you got to do evil things to the evil people, right? And that becomes, where you become evil and you don't even realize it, because you've kind of outsourced your connection to it. Like, the evil now exists in you. What do you do with it? Like, how do you get rid of it? Like, all this evil now that's being, all the evil things that we are doing that we don't even know about as a country. All the evil things that are being doing to keep your lifestyle going by the intelligence community and by the the government and the army, the military industrial complex, the corporations, and all this evil shit that's being done to prop up a system that's demonic and ego driven and disconnected from the divine essence that has manifested the universe, right? And so we all are suffering consequences from the evil system falling apart and the evil coming to the surface. And it isn't like something where you're like, oh, Kamala Harris is the evil one, or the Democrats are the evil one, Trump's the hero. It's not, not only is that not the case, but it doesn't work that way, right? It's like the whole system. It's the deep state. No, the whole system is demonic in nature. I came across this, I was watching this TV show. There was this, let me find it here. There was this, this monk for this, one of these Mongolian Khans had become a monk, and he reads this part of Jeremiah 13. Now, the Jeremiah 13, which is part of the Old Testament, which I've talked about, is just a horrible book because of the way it portrays God, right? But the Jeremiah, his book is intended as a message to the Jews in exile in Babylon, explain the disaster of exile of God's response to Israel's pagan worship. The people, says Jeremiah, are like unfaithful wife and rebellious children. Their infidelity and rebelliousness made judgment inevitable, although restoration and new covenant are foreshadowed. And so this is about God being petty and jealous, what they're calling God, and it isn't God, but God being petty and jealous because these guys who, they're exiled because of Moses, the exile that they're wandering around the desert, where, I've heard another explanation of this is that there were these demons that were connected to this tribe in the desert, and they were weaponized by this demonic energy that they thought was God, right? Which is a valid narrative that makes sense in how things played out. But it says this is what the Lord said to me. Go and buy a linen belt and put it around your waist, but do not let it touch water. So I bought the belt as the Lord directed, and I put it around my waist. Then the word of God came to me a second time. Take the belt you bought and you are wearing around your waist and go to Perith and hide it there in a crevice in the rocks. So I went and hid it at Perith as the Lord told me. Many days later, the Lord said to me, go now to Perith and get the belt I told you to hide. So I went to Perith and dug up the belt and took it from the place where I had hidden it, but now it was ruined and completely useless. Then the word of the Lord came to me. This is what the Lord said. It's the same way I ruined the pride of Judah and the great pride of Jerusalem, the wicked people who refuse to listen to my words, who follow stubbornness of their hearts and go after other gods to serve and worship for them, were like the belt, completely useless. For as the belt is around the waist, so bounded all the people of Israel and all the people of Judah to me, declares the Lord. To my people to be my people for my renown and praise and honor, but they have not listened. Say to them, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: every wineskin should be filled with wine. If they say to you, don't we know that every wineskin should be filled with wine? Then tell them, this is what the Lord says: I am going to fill with drunkenness all who live in this land, including the kings who sit on David's throne, the priests, the prophets, and all those living in Jerusalem. And this is the thing the guy read in the TV show, where he recited, I will smash them one against the other, parents and children alike, declares the Lord. I will allow no pity or mercy or compassion to keep me from destroying them, right? So the God of Israel, the God in the Old Testament, is a violent, petty, narcissistic, whiny little egotistical prick who is jealous and is constantly wrathful towards the people who, won't worship him. And that's not what God is, because God is in everything, right? The New Testament is a little bit better, but this is the foundation of the book. And this idea that you're evil and bad and you guys just can't rise up to God is true, all of us, right? that there's some element, some, darkness in humanity that we keep on going to the lowest common denominator. Like even saints, there's a long history of saints, including Jesus, who rose up to high levels of spirituality and then had some kind of spiritual fall. The planet is so, easily compromises people takes them away from their soul's path. People get lured away in whatever pleasure-based, power-based, whatever it might be. And saints and spiritual people, this happens quite often. It's, sad and it's part of what we are. But we do have divinity within us, right? And it's ultimately God's, we're God's creations. And whatever abomination that we've become, that was a possibility within God's manifested universe. Like this is, victim consciousness and evil and all these things that exist, hatred and things. They were human creations, but we're all God's creations to start with. Everybody's a child of God. Every soul is, everything in creation has some sort of spiritual essence and energy, right? And God's system, the divine system, has contingencies to deal with depravity. And one thing is to wipe out the civilization, because it has to be. Like it's a cancer, like our civilization's a cancer. It has to be wiped out. There's no other solution. Like there's good things here that we enjoy in our lifestyle and things that we like about, plane travel and car travel and air-conditioned rooms and, heated whatever it is, hot water and, cold, all these things that are available. Running water. I mean, there's a lot of great things in our civilization and things that we would have trouble living without. And so that's like the too big to fail part of, what I talk about this quite often. We're addicted to a system, 100% addicted to a system that's evil and taking people in the wrong direction because it's not based in divine will and principles, the debt-based economic system and the hedonistic, materialistic focused, right? Because there's nothing in your system. I mean, when have you heard that divinity is within you? God is inside of you. God has to be. By every definition, by every religion, if God created you, if God created the universe, I mean, your own, biblical tales, God created the universe in 7 days, which again is silly. Like there's no days there only days existed after the earth was created. But God created the heavens and the earth and all these things, right? In the first part of Genesis. And if God created everything, then God created you. So there's divinity within you. And if you have a soul, that's, your divine essence. The nature of your soul is pure and divine. Your spiritual essence. And so if you have that in you, why are you not connecting with it? I've been working towards to connect with the divinity within me for over 30 years, and it's had transformational type of benefits. I mean, I've been transformed as a person because of that, because of the Sajmark system that helps people connect with that, right? And so, I mean, it's a wonderful process, and it's there for everybody to experience. But why wouldn't you be told that? Why wouldn't your religion tell you that? Why wouldn't you be, aware of this at birth? Some cultures you are. In some cultures, they talk about the divinity within you, right? The namaste in Indian, the Indian culture, right? Pranams, where they, the divinity within me bows before the divinity within you, right? Recognizing that people have a soul and a spiritual essence. I mean, people think, think about their soul or know that they have a soul, but never think about it. Oh yeah, I have a soul, but what have you done to connect with it? Like you have an ego, right? Your ego's running wild, but your soul is just being neglected. Because of the nature of our our religion is remedial and demonic, and it's gone over to the dark side, and the majority the major religions have been compromised. They're not teaching this fundamental principle. I have this book, My Friend Within, that's for kids about finding the divinity within you. Like it's a board book, right? Except I couldn't do it on a board book because I don't have the it's on Amazon. But, there's this element I talk about all the time, divinity within you. And, I've had millions upon millions of viewers. Like, I think with the deleted videos, I've deleted some videos that had millions or hundreds of thousands of views. I had a video that had 2 million views. And I had lots of videos that had, either a million views or 800,000 views, right? These were more commercialized type of Illuminati crap where I had a lot more sheeple coming to my channel, right? And times have changed, of course, with YouTube. But I get on a regular basis, and I talk about this, I think, somewhere recently, over 5,000 views a day, right? In terms of my channel, the amount of views I'm getting, around 5,000 views. It doesn't seem like a lot given, people are watching, millions of people are watching, whatever it is, like some other channels or mainstream crap or whatever it is. But 5,000 people is a lot of people, right? And over the course of this channel, I've had like 150 million something views. And then my other channel has another 20, 30 million views on it. And then there are, deleted videos and things. And with all of that, how many people have gravitated to this idea of the divinity within them? And I talk about this more in my, my other channel, which I'm not going to, discuss here. I'm going to put this narrative in there anyway, so I don't want to get too redundant. But I had this, I've often thought about this, right? People will gravitate to my channel when I make Britney videos or celebrity videos. They like to see me mock Britney and, all these things. Mock politicians, if it's the right one. If I'm mocking Kamala, that's great. When I'm mocking Trump, they get butthurt or whatever, right? If I'm mocking Cardi B, it's good, but the ones who identify with Britney get mad at me. But, in general, it's the lower nature stuff, right? The stuff that I could get a lot more views if I just covered the Kardashians or whatever it is, right? Pop culture, Hollywood stuff. And I made my channel just about that. But the primary message that I have to deliver here about divinity within you and, my knowledge of that and all these things, the evil, battling these things, and the higher nature is, rejected by most people, whether it be from me or somebody else. Like if they can't hear it from me, they won't hear it from somebody else who talks about it in a different way, right? Like there are better Christian churches. There are better pastors. There are pastors who are, better at understanding divinity and have more of a spiritual aspect. The difference between religion and spirituality is religion said God is outside of you. You're a piece of shit and God's great. And maybe you'll get into heaven if God blesses you. I mean, this is this idea in Christianity, but these other religions that, you're a worthless piece of shit and there's nothing inside of you that's divine and you're worthless, but if you worship God, then, or you worship the God of the religion, then they'll give you a pass in the afterlife, a ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, right? But, that's this idea of God being in heaven somewhere, where spirituality is God's within you, and you have a better version of yourself that once you've, minimized your ego, you've dealt with your ego in some way, where your ego embraces the divine nature, then you can become something of a higher developed person and rise to a higher level of consciousness. And that's the highest, right? That's of the two things. There's this great saying from Master Chargy, the third master of the system, that the lowest part of the higher, which is spiritual, is higher than the highest part of the lower. And you can become the most powerful person. You can become an emperor. You can become, a scholar, the best athlete, the best, the best actor, the best celebrity, the biggest celebrity, all these things. And you're still lower than a person who's just starting to, take their initial steps on the spiritual path, which very few people do. And that's the problem with humanity, right? People embrace the lower, which is where the evil incubates and the evil proliferates and never become spiritual people, where they interact with the divinity within them. And they take responsibility for all the things in their lives as being for their good and coming from God. Even the evil stuff is coming from God. And that when you don't look at yourself as being a victim, but being somebody who is, is being handled and being managed and being, by your soul and by the divine sort of, spiritual support team. And that everything is accounted for and there's nothing that's unfair, even though it appears unfair, that these things are for your benefit. And if you take them like as coming from God as opposed to coming from, just random chance or, whatever it is, like some kind of, oh, why did this happen to me? Or why would God do this to me, to get pissed off at God? God, you suck. Why did you do this to me, right? Well, why did you do this in a past life? Why did you, why did you create this future for yourself, right? Like right now, you're creating your future by your decisions and your actions. Your past has created your present, and your present is creating your future. And so everything that's happening is based on your thoughts, your actions, and all these things. They're all affecting your future life and your future your current decisions and your attitudes and your what your thoughts are and your feelings and your emotions and all these things that you're indulging in. If you're indulging in hate and anger, then that's going to be part of your future. You're indulging in fear and paranoia, any number of things, right? All those things are creating your future, right? All your thoughts, all your emotions are manifesting your future right now. I talked about how, like, I had these hair clippers and I decided not to charge them, and I was setting myself up. I was screwing over, Tuesday Paul was screwing over Thursday Paul. Like, I'm doing something where then I have to clean up my mess from Tuesday. Like the person that made decisions on Tuesday is affecting me negatively on Thursday, right? Like, I'm very aware of these things, like doing something where I'm just kicking a problem down the road that a future version of myself is going to have to deal with. My future Paul is going to have to deal with the problems current Paul is making for himself, right? I'm very conscious of these things on a day-to-day basis. So anyways, this is the nature of good and evil and all of it, right? That evil exists in every person. And what do you do with it? How do you deal with it? And people don't know how to deal with it. You've been injected with a virus, like a computer virus, and it's circulated inside your system, and it wants some form of expression. The evil that's being projected out there in every aspect of our society, and the demonic nature of our society is a part of your ego, you're part of your psyche, you're part of your internal makeup, and it's looking to express itself. And how do you cope with it? How do you deal with it, right? And there's ways, I talk about the Gratefullness meditation, Saj Marg, the cleaning process, and, being aware of it and dealing with it, dealing with it as being something that you have to deal with and not projecting it out like it's something outside of you. Your hatred, I talk about this, if you feel hatred, the object of your hate is, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or your ex or your spouse now or one of your relatives or your parents or whatever, right? The person that you hate is the object of your hate, but the hate is inside of you. And that hate makes you feel bad. You have to get rid of it, right? You have this resentment and hate inside of you. And if you indulge in it and, you feel like you're justified in hating somebody else, then that hate just consumes you. It consumes your internal world. And you see people like that in the truth community justifying their bad behaviors, their lies, their manipulations, their evil behaviors because they think that they're the good guys and they're fighting somebody who's bad and they get to use evil to defeat evil, right? But then you become evil. You see these revolutions where people depose the current leader, and the revolution always gets really bad. It gets worse than it was under the like I've said, this governments suck. Governments are horrible. When you take down a government, it gets way worse. And you see that in all these countries, like Libya, like all these countries where there's regime change. You take down someone who's an evil dictator, then there's all these junior dictators that little wannabes that rise up gangs, and the vacuum, the power vacuum is filled by criminals, right, and sociopaths. So you take out one sociopath, and you give birth to hundreds of them, and everything falls apart. There's no rule of law. People say, all right, cops are horrible, police are horrible, militaries are horrible. Yeah, but you get rid of those, and then everybody just does whatever the fuck they want, and they express their evil, and then it just everything falls apart. And that's going to happen here, and it's going to happen everywhere. When the evil system falls apart, if people don't embrace their higher nature, it's this idea, when the deep state goes, that it'll be kumbaya and everyone will get along. No, people will be stealing from each other, killing each other. The system breaks down. You no longer have food in your grocery stores. People don't have any skills. They're mentally ill. They're, warped people. They're already making bad decisions with an oppressive system that is, keeping them in line. But there's no criminal justice system. There's no consequences for your actions. People will be murdering and, killing and doing all these things because there's no authority stopping them from doing it, right? There's no as evil as the system is, as evil as and oppressive as the system is, it's helped keeping the evil nature in individuals down. And it only takes 10% of the people to go south, and that's going to create fear and panic, and all the evil that now is incubating inside of people is now released and manifesting itself, and that's what happens. Like it's happened throughout history, and it's a sad fact that human beings tend to go to the lower. They flirt with their higher nature from time to time. I mean, that's all of us. We flirt with our higher nature, but then the lower nature comes out, right, and it dominates, and it's just it's been a problem with humanity, and it has to stop. Like it's coming to a point where there has to be one way or another, where people have to rise up to a higher level collectively, or they have to just wipe humanity out and try something else. Like it's been a failed experiment. I've talked about this in various videos. But anyways, this is getting long. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.